In this tutorial, we are going to add a drunken walk to our non-player character or enemy so that we are able to then chase it down, and we're then going to have to add some collision detection to find out whether we have managed to catch it or not. So we're going to start off by looking at some code to update our game logic for the enemy. Very similar to the code that we have for our player. So the player has X coordinates and an X speed, Y coordinates and a Y speed. And for our non-player character, we have coordinates A and B. And the code here is very similar to this here, except that it uses randomness to move around. So I'm going to switch to my Replit. I'm looking at phase 7, enemy movement and collision in the project. And that should load up with a README file explaining what is going on. So we are going to detect collisions between objects. First of all, we need to move our enemy around, and that's the code we've just looked at. Then we're going to add some collision detection. Now the collision detection that we're going to use, we're going to write as a function. And this is something that we've not used yet in our code, so we'll have a little bit of a look at how that operates. We're going to check two different objects against each other to see if they occupy the same space. And if you want to find out more about that, you could use this link here, which will take you to a YouTube video that explains all about how we detect collisions. The basic idea is that if two objects are not in the same place, then they're not colliding. If they are overlapping completely, then obviously they have bumped into each other. But also we need to check some special edge cases. What if the corners are just touching? What if one edge has clipped the other edge? What if another corner is touching? So our code should deal with all of these possibilities. I'm going to go to main.py. and see what we've got here. I'm just going to stretch this to make a little bit of extra space for that code. Maybe a little bit this way too. And I'm just going to check that my size, 400 by 300, is a decent size for working on Replit as well. Okay, so the first thing I have to do, according to my instructions here, is go and add this code, the random movement plus the constraints to keep on screen, to my enemy coordinates. So if I scroll down here, you can see that at the moment I'm just adding random amounts to what's going on. And if I run this, we shall probably see that a huge massive circle there, and eventually it will end up staggering off screen. You can see it's almost off the top there, and now it's disappeared. Might come back in, it's a bit random. So we don't really want that. We want to keep it within the bounds of the screen. The first thing is it was very jittery there. So I'm going to go to my size, and my size is 30. I'm going to take that down to a much more reasonable 15. And then I'm going to have a look at this random amount that it's moving, and maybe we should just go between -5 and 5. And that way it will not be jostling about quite so much as it was before. Having added a random amount between -5 and 5 to A and B, what I now need to do is make sure that they cannot leave the screen. So if A goes below 0, it's going to try and go off the left edge of the screen. I'm just going to set A equal to 0. And I can do an elif here. So elif A is greater than max width minus size, then I'm going to, and I should have put a colon on there to make that a question, and that'll indent automatically. Then A equals max width minus size. And then I want to do something very similar with B. So my indentation's a bit messed up here. I must have been using spaces. So if b is less than 0, then b should be set to 0 so that it can't go into a negative value. Elif b is greater than max height minus size, then b equals max height minus size. I can see that it's highlighted max width here because I've spelled it wrong, so use the built-in tools to check and see, look for red underlining to help you with your debugging rather than always relying on the interpreter picking up on mistakes. If I run that, it's not jostling about quite as much now, but hopefully when it gets to the edge of the screen, it will then not try to go any further. And the problem with constraining it is that it's now going to take a long time to get to the screen. There we go. So it doesn't seem to be going off the screen there, maybe just to the middle of the circle, which keeps it still within the screen. Okay. So we have managed to fix our player, but we now need to add in some collision detection. So what we need to do with a function is a special block of code that can be called lots of times, and you can also give it some values to work with. Now we need to declare this function before we try to use it inside our main game loop. So I would say that a good place to put it is probably just after this section here. And I'm going to declare a function by saying def. Def is to define the function. It's like giving it its name. And we're going to call it check collide. Now check collide is a function that takes a bit of information. It takes the x and y coordinates of one object. So I'm going to call it x1, y1. And then it takes the height and width of that. So because x goes across, I'm going to give it width first, width 1, and height 1. And then it takes a second object to see whether it's banged into it. So that's going to be x2, y2, width 2, height 2. So that there is going to define our collision function. I need to put a colon at the end because I'm now about to make a block of code, and that should be indented from the side. Okay, so I'm going to have a score variable. So I'm going to put score there. And we seem to have lost score from the main code that we had earlier. So I really need to have possibly up here score equals 0.0 as well. Now, I want to check my collisions. So if x1 plus width 1, if that is beyond x2, then I might have bumped in from that side. So I'm going to ask the next question then. If x1 is less than x2 plus width 2, then they are occupying the same horizontal space. So they might be colliding, but they could be above each other or below each other. So we need to keep asking questions. We need to start asking about the vertical parts. If y1 plus height 1 is bigger than y2, and if y1 is less than y2 plus height 2, if all of those things are happening, then they're kind of in the same space as each other. They're overlapping. So what I'm just going to say here is score equals score plus 1. And that is our block of code that defines our variables. Now you can see it's complaining here that local variable score is assigned to but never used. And the reason that's a problem, this score here is working for the whole game. This score here and here is just happening inside this function. So to make this work, I have to add in here global score. And global score will mean when I'm using this function, it knows it's got to use the main score that applies to the whole game. Okay, so I now have a function that can be reused. I haven't actually used it yet. If I run my game, it will be no different to what we had before. I can click in here and move around. I can bounce about. And eventually I'll probably hit that green circle, but nothing will happen. And the reason for that is that we haven't actually used the function. We've declared it like writing a recipe in a recipe book, but we haven't actually used it. And where we're going to use it is down here, just before we update the screen. After we've checked the positions of all of our objects, we are then going to say check collide. So use that function. And it wants an x1 and a y1, so we're going to give it our player, x comma y. And the player is a square that's size by size. So we give it those two as its height and width. Then it wants to have an x2 and a y2, so we're going to give it the enemy, a comma b. And that's also size by size. And now, if we run our code, I've got an unindent does not match. So this here is my problem with the spacing again, should be there. And the problem that I have, of course, is that this section of code does not have the fonts and scoring that was added in the previous section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly copy and paste them in from some other code. So what I've done now, I have added in some extra bits and pieces here. I have included a declaration for a font called myFont. So that's set up as a monospace 15-point font. And then down in the drawing section, I then have, as we had in a previous exercise, score text equals myfont.render. And I'm putting the score and I'm drawing it in yellow. And then screen.blit, the score text at 1010, will let me see what's happening to that score. So check collide is added in here to change the score if I bump two objects together. And we should see that if I click on run. So if I steer my red triangle, we got a change in score there. There you go. When it's bumping, it is changing the score. And I should probably try and slow down a little bit to make that a little bit easier. But each time it's bouncing into the green circle, we are actually getting a change in score. And just to tidy this off, I'm going to go up here. I'm going to put yellow equals 255, 255, 0. And then I'm going to come down here to where I'm drawing my score, and I'm going to tell it to use yellow at that point there. So here we have it. Our yellow score is appearing there, and if I click in here and connect with that, And you can see that when it hit the green circle,